Hello, and welcome to the Sleep Haunt. If you're new here, please subscribe and like the video to support the channel. You can also support us by sending a super thanks on this video. Your support truly helps the channel grow. Now, relax and enjoy the story.
Story number 1. The highway rolled out beneath the truck like a dark, endless ribbon, its yellow lines fading in and out beneath the low sweep of the headlights. It was after midnight, the kind of late when the world felt emptied out, like someone had quietly gathered all the people and sounds and tucked them away for the night. Only the hum of the engine and the muted whine of the tires kept the driver company as the rig eased west along an old stretch of state road that most had stopped using years ago. Fog had started as a distant thought on the horizon, a pale smudge over the asphalt. By the time the truck reached that pale line, it had thickened into a wall. It wasn't the high, drifting mist that hung above valleys. This fog sat low and close, a dense, woolen thing that curled around the cab and swallowed the beams of the headlights as soon as they left the lenses. Beyond the hood, the world reduced itself to a small circle of wet black road and a few wavering reflectors that floated up out of the gray, then slipped away behind. Inside the cab, the air was warm and faintly humming with electricity. The dashboard glowed softly, a little constellation of green and amber lights. The radio was on, but the station had slowly filled with static. The deeper the truck went into the fog, until music became only a distant, fractured murmur under a storm of white noise. The driver reached out and turned the volume down until it was just barely there, a whispering presence at the edge of hearing. Out here, nighttime had a different quality. The sky was a blank lid of fog darkness pressing down. The usual brush of distant town lights on the horizon was gone, hidden. The stars had vanished hours ago. Even the moon, which had risen huge and pale at the start of the run, was just a vague, brighter smear somewhere above the clouded dome. It gave the night the feeling of being indoors, like driving through a long, dim hallway that never ended. The odometer ticked. Miles fell away in gentle, mechanical increments. The driver kept the speed low, the hands steady on the wheel. Every so often a road sign loomed suddenly from the mist, bright and reflective, its words too late to be useful. Rest area, 12 miles. Next services, 54 miles. State Correctional Facility, exit 3. They rose up, hovered for a breath, then slid past, swallowed again. No other vehicles appeared. No glare of approaching headlights, no taillights fading in the distance. Just the truck and the fog and the steady, quiet rhythms of motion. The first odd thing was how quiet the world outside seemed when the driver cracked the window. Just a few inches, enough to let in the cold, damp air and a bit of the smell of wet asphalt. The wind should have rushed in, grabbing at the edges of paper, tugging at clothes. Instead, there was a soft, muffled stillness. The air was icy, but it moved reluctantly, as if the fog thickened it, turning it into something more like water than air. The engine's rumble echoed strangely out there, bouncing back into the cab in a flattened, delayed way, like a recording played half a second too late. They shut the window and listened as that flat echo disappeared. Inside, the world felt real again, soft fabric of the seat, the slight vibration in the steering wheel, the clink of a mug against plastic as the truck dipped over a small imperfection in the road. Outside, though, the fog pressed close on every side, a pale, almost luminous gray that seemed to be listening in. The driver checked the clock. A little past 1 in the morning. According to the route plan, there was an old truck stop somewhere along this highway, a place marked on the map with a faded symbol and the name Whisper Pines. It sounded like a relic, one of those all-night diners that had seen their best days decades ago but clung on as a refuge for the few who still used this route. Coffee there would be thin, probably, pie dry at the edges, but it would be light and company, at least for a little while. The CB radio sat quiet on the dash, its green display ticking over channels like a slow heartbeat. Earlier that evening, it had been filled with the low, easy banter of other truckers calling out mile markers and weather reports, trading old stories to keep each other awake. Somewhere back along the interstate, those voices had faded, one by one as the driver turned off onto this older road. Now, if the talk button was pressed, there was only a soft hiss, no voices riding the static. The second odd thing happened about 10 miles later. It started with a shape at the edge of the headlights. Something small, pale, low to the ground. It flickered into view and vanished just as fast, like an afterimage on the eye. The driver leaned forward instinctively, watching the fog ahead. There it was again, a quick, skittering movement across the right side of the lane. Too small to be a deer, too smooth to be a piece of trash caught in a crosswind. The driver slowed a little, peering into the gray. The fog responded by becoming somehow denser, beads of moisture sparkling briefly in the beams before returning to blending, shifting softness. The road itself seemed to narrow, though the asphalt clearly held the same width. Trees loomed a little closer, their upper branches lost in the fog, their trunks dark and slick with damp. Another shape streaked past. This time, the driver caught more of it. A length of something pale, sinewy, not quite a tail, not quite a limb. It moved with unsettling smoothness, curling back into the mist as though it were made of vapor itself. There was no thump against the tires, no crunch, no sign of impact. Only a brief electric jolt of adrenaline, a quickened heartbeat, the awareness of suddenly being very alone in a place where things might move just beyond the reach of headlights. The driver shook off the feeling, muttering something under their breath, and focused on the white line at the edge of the lane. Just fog, just tricks of light and tired eyes. Long miles behind, long miles ahead. The radio station had gone completely now. No music, not even static, just a faint, soft hum of silence. The CB was still quiet. The dashboard clock ticked over another minute without seeming to. At last, a new set of lights appeared ahead, dim and yellow, like lanterns left out in a field. The driver straightened a little. The fog thinned near the glow, swirling aside as if out of respect. A bent sign reflected the headlights. Whisper Pines Truck Stop, open 24 hours. One arrow pointed down an exit ramp that dropped away into darkness. The driver guided the truck down the ramp, feeling the change in surface under the tires, the newer smoothness of the state road replaced by an older, slightly rougher pavement. The fog clung close, but the truck stop's lights punched small, rusty holes in it. A wide lot opened up, its lines faded, the edges clustered with shadowed shapes of idle trailers. An old gas island stood to the left, its pumps wearing chipped paint and cracked logos from companies that had updated their branding long ago. Beyond the pump sat a low, rectangular building with a peaked roof. Its windows glowed a warm amber, and a sign above the door buzzed faintly. Some of its neon tubing burned out so that Whisper Pines read more like Wispy PNS. A single lamppost near the entrance cast a circle of pale yellow light that seemed to hover in the damp air rather than travel through it. The driver eased the truck into a spot near the edge of the lot, set the brake, and cut the engine. Silence rushed in, heavy and soft, broken only by the ticking of the cooling motor and the faint, distant hiss of the lamp. The fog pressed itself against the windshield, pearling it with moisture. For a moment, the driver sat there, listening, eyes tracing the dim outlines of other parked rigs. None of them showed signs of life. No running engines, no shifting shadows behind curtains. When the door opened, the night's cold slid in like a careful hand, touching the skin, sliding under the collar. The air smelled faintly of wet gravel, old diesel, and something else. Pine, distant and thin, like a memory of Christmas trees and winter cabins. Yet there were no visible pines nearby, only low, bare-branched trees hugging the lot's edges. The driver climbed down, boots crunching lightly on damp grit, and headed toward the building, breath streaming in pale clouds. The entrance door was old glass framed in metal that had lost most of its original shine. A bell hung above it, the kind that jingles softly when someone enters. As the driver reached for the handle, there was a flicker at the corner of their vision, a pale shape moving slowly along the fog-draped edge of the lot, low to the ground, sinuously smooth. By the time they turned their head, it had vanished, leaving only the shifting gray. Inside, the air was warm and thick with the smell of coffee, frying oil, and the faint, comforting scent of old wood. The bell above the door gave a muted jingle that sounded a little tired. Light here was softer, yellowed by age and nicotine on the ceilings. Vinyl booths lined the windows, their cushions cracked and mended with strips of tape. A long counter with fixed stools sat under mirrored shelves displaying coffee cups and a row of old, unlabeled syrup bottles. A few ceiling fans turned lazily overhead, slicing the warmth into gentle currents. They made a soft clicking sound with each rotation, a rhythm that blended with the low hum of refrigerators and the faint sizzle from the kitchen. A small television mounted high in one corner showed a weather map, but the sound was turned down low enough that only vague shapes of presenters' mouths could be seen forming silent words. At first glance, the place appeared empty. No other customers. The driver's boots made muted thumps on the worn linoleum as they approached the counter. From somewhere in the back, there was the clink of dishes, the low roll of a voice, humming a tune that didn't resolve into anything familiar. A moment later, a figure emerged from the swinging kitchen door. An older woman in a faded blue uniform, her graying hair tied back loosely, her eyes kind but a little distant, like someone in the habit of looking far beyond the walls they're standing in. She offered a small smile, one that felt practiced yet genuine. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice low and smooth, with the rasp of someone who'd spent many years in smoky rooms and over hot stoves. The driver nodded, settling onto a stool at the counter. The vinyl squeaked faintly under their weight. "Yeah, coffee sounds good. Rough night on the road." The woman picked up a heavy ceramic mug from the rack and began to pour from a pot that had been sitting under a warmer. The liquid came out dark and steady, steam curling up in slow, ghostly tendrils. "Fog'll do that," she said, eyes flicking briefly toward the windows, where only blank gray pressed back. "It's been thick tonight, thicker than usual." The driver glanced over their shoulder at the window. From inside, the fog looked less like weather and more like something alive, gliding and pulsing softly against the glass, searching for a way in. The reflection of the diner's interior hung on its surface soft lights, rows of booths, the outline of the driver's own shoulders layered over that pale, shifting murk. "Feels like driving through cotton," the driver said, wrapping their hands around the mug. The ceramic was warm, grounding. "Haven't seen another soul out there in hours." The woman gave a little nod, absently polishing a spot on the counter with a rag. "Folks don't take this road much anymore. New bypass took most of the traffic. We still get some drivers here and there, those who remember us, those who find us." There was a slight pause after that last part. Not ominous exactly, but enough to stir a small ripple of awareness along the driver's spine. They took a cautious sip of the coffee. It was strong and slightly bitter, but solid, dependable, the sort of coffee that tasted like long nights and small comforts. "Guess I'm one of the lucky ones," the driver said, trying to nudge the moment into something easy. "Didn't think I'd find anything open out here this late." The woman smiled again, though this time the corners of her mouth trembled just a little. "We're always open," she said, "nights when drivers need a place most. Something about these highways after midnight, especially in weather like this, makes the mind start to wander, makes you see things in the fog, hear things." The driver shifted on the stool, the faintly sticky surface of the vinyl catching for a moment. In the reflection of the window, a shape moved behind their shoulder, gliding along the line of booths. But when they turned, the diner behind them was empty. The television flickered silently. The fans turned with their soft clock-like clicking. The booths were still. The air smelled of coffee and old wood and something else. Now something faintly metallic, like cooled rain on rust. "You get a lot of strange stories out here?" the driver asked, eyes moving slowly around the room, taking in the details. The faded postcards pinned above the register, the shelf of mismatched mugs, the old jukebox in the corner that seemed to hum gently to itself, even though no light showed on its display. The woman poured herself a small cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, as though settling into a familiar ritual. "Oh, you hear things," she said. "Folks rolling in around this hour, eyes wide, hands still shaking. Some of them talk, some don't. You can tell even with the quiet ones. Something out there's come close enough to breathe on them." A draft moved through the diner then, so slight it barely stirred the napkin holders, but it brought with it a whisper of cold that threaded along the floor and climbed the driver's ankles. The bell above the front door gave a tiny jingle, but the door didn't move. The driver's gaze slid toward it anyway, expecting to see someone that wasn't there. "What kind of things?" they asked, taking another slow sip of coffee. The warmth of it pushed back a little against the chill that had crept under their clothes. The woman considered for a moment, eyes distant, as if watching something replay on the inside of her eyelids. "Voices," she said softly. "People swear they hear someone talking to them through the CB, even when they know it's turned off. Long, low conversations that go on for miles, and then..." She snapped her fingers quietly. Silence. Like whoever they were talking to dropped right off the face of the earth. The driver glanced at their phone. No signal. Not even a flicker of a bar. The fog outside seemed to press harder against the windows, thickening. The lights from the lot, casting only pale halos instead of beams. "Others see things moving along the roadside," the woman continued, her voice slow, almost hypnotic. "Not animals, not people, just shapes. Long and pale, slipping between the trees, keeping pace with the truck. Get too curious, look at them too long, and you start feeling like they're looking back, even though they've got no eyes to speak of." A memory stirred in the driver. That first flicker at the edge of the headlights, the pale, smooth length of something curling back into the fog. Their fingers tightened slightly around the mug. The ceramic's warmth anchored them. "What are they?" the driver asked, keeping their tone light, though their voice sounded a touch too casual to their own ears. The woman gave a small shrug, her shoulders rising under the thin fabric of her uniform. "Depends who you ask. Some say they're just tricks of the fog. Some say there's something older. Things that lived along trails before there were roads. Roads before there were highways. Maybe they like the quiet better now that most folks have moved on." She took a sip of her coffee, eyes meeting the driver's over the rim of the mug. For a long heartbeat, there was no sound but the fans and the low murmur of the unseen kitchen. "You're lucky you found this place tonight," she added, almost as an afterthought. The clock behind the counter showed 1:27. A second hand ticked steadily, though the sound of it was swallowed by the soft acoustics of the diner. On the television, the weather map had frozen mid-sweep, the presenter's hand hovering above a glowing band of storms, unmoving. The driver blinked, and the image stayed still, a frozen frame. Something moved in the reflection again. Not behind them this time, but just outside the window. A slow, sliding motion, as if something tall and thin were pressing along the glass from the outside, its shape blurring into the fog, too indistinct to fully resolve, but clear enough to suggest that it was there. Watching. The driver's breath hitched for a moment. "Do they ever come in?" the driver asked quietly, setting the mug down with careful precision. "Those things out there." The woman's gaze drifted toward the window, then back. Her smile was small and sad. "No," she said. "They don't seem to like the light or the coffee or the company. Places like this, they're sort of a different kind of road. A stopping place in more ways than one. Long as the lights are on and the doors are open, those things stay out there. They pace, they wait, but they don't come in." The driver listened to the words, feeling them settle into the quiet space between the fans' slow clicking. "How long has Whisper Pines been here?" they asked. "Oh," she said, considering. "A long time. Longer than the bypass, longer than the new interstates. We were here when the old logging trucks first started rolling through. Before that, they say it was a boarding house for folks traveling by carriage. Way Station, they called it then. A place you could stop and rest, no matter how late at night you arrived." Outside, another shape passed along the fogged glass. Slower this time. It did not make a sound, but the driver felt a soft, inexplicable pressure in their chest, as if something cold had leaned in very close, just on the other side of the glass, and listened. "They don't like it when folks don't stop," the woman said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Those shapes, the things out there, when the fog is this thick, when the night is this deep, they watch the ones who keep going. They follow. Sometimes they call." She lifted a hand and tapped a fingernail gently on the CB unit, sitting on a shelf behind the counter, an old model. Its casing scuffed, and its microphone cord curled loosely. You'd be surprised how many drivers swear up and down they turned theirs off, but still heard a voice, someone they knew, or thought they knew, saying their name. telling them to keep driving, to ignore the exits, the little places of light along the road. Just a little farther, the voices say. Just a few more miles. The driver's own CB came to mind, silent and green-lit back in the cab. There had been a moment, just before they'd turned off the main highway, when they could have sworn they heard a faint, familiar call sign through the static one they hadn't heard in years. Not since an accident on a mountain pass had taken a fellow driver in a sudden, quiet way. At the time, they'd chalked it up to fatigue and memory. Now, sitting here, the thought settled over them like another layer of fog. "How long can I stay?" the driver asked, glancing at the clock again. The second hand still moved, but the minute hand hadn't shifted. "As long as you need," the woman replied. "Some stay an hour. Some stay until dawn. Some stay longer." Her eyes flicked toward the booths, their cracked vinyl cushions half lit by hanging lamps. For a moment, the driver could almost see other figures sitting there. Shadowy outlines in trucker caps and heavy jackets, faces blurred by time and dim light, hands wrapped around cups that never quite emptied. A soft creak sounded from one of the back booths. The driver turned quickly, but saw no one. The air there seemed thicker, though, a faint haze within the haze, as if shapes had just finished the act of leaving, and their impressions were still dissolving. The coffee was almost gone. The mug felt lighter in their hands. The driver realized, distantly, that they didn't remember taking all the sips between full and empty. "Do you go out there?" the driver asked suddenly, not sure why the question had risen. "Into the fog?" The woman's smile faded a little at the edges. "Not if I can help it," she said. "The lot, maybe. Just to take a breath, look at the sky when it's clear. But not on nights like this. Nights like this, you stay where the lights are, where the walls remember you. Out there, the road can forget things. People, names, time." Another slight draft moved through, carrying the scent of wet asphalt and pine. The bell above the front door jingled faintly, though it didn't open. For a heartbeat, the driver saw the outline of a tall, thin figure just beyond the glass of the entrance, a silhouette drawn in fog, stretching slightly taller than any person should. Then it was gone, like breath wiped from a mirror. "Tell you what," the woman said softly, pulling them back. "You can sit a while. Let the worst of the night pass. When you feel ready, you go on. Just, when you leave, don't look too hard into the fog. Don't listen if you hear your name where it shouldn't be. And if your radio starts talking on its own, you turn it off, and you leave it off. Understand?" The driver nodded slowly. The advice settled in the mind like directions given at the start of a journey into unknown country. They moved to a booth by the window, the vinyl sighing under their weight. From here, the view of the lot was a soft smear of lights and fog, the parked trucks reduced to hulking shadows. Now and then, something slid between those shadows, a pale suggestion of movement. The wind, if it was, wind brushed against the building with a low, steady sound, like many hands running along the walls from the outside. Time passed strangely. The driver watched the frozen weather map on the television until, in a blink, it was suddenly a different image. Late-night infomercial hosts, silently gesturing at products. The clock's minute hand had jumped forward without the driver remembering it moving. The coffee in the fresh mug the woman had brought was already half gone, though they had no clear memory of lifting it. Somewhere between one blink and the next, the fog outside began to thin. Not much, just enough that the shapes beyond it became a bit more defined. The parked rigs looked more like machines again, and less like crouching animals. The lamps in the lot cast a little farther, pushing the dim halo a few extra feet. In the distance, just beyond the farthest circle of light, something long and pale turned away, slipping back toward the trees, as if losing interest. "You'll have a quieter run from here," the woman said, appearing at the edge of the booth with the quiet suddenness of someone very used to moving unnoticed. "Fog's lifting some. Things out there get restless as dawn comes on. They don't like the bright." The driver looked down at their hands. No tremor, no real sign of nerves. Only a kind of deep, settled awareness that something had been very close tonight. Closer than it had been in years on the road. "How much do I owe you?" they asked, reaching automatically for their wallet. The woman shook her head. "You can catch us next time you come through," she said. "We remember our regulars, but I've never..." the driver began, then stopped. In the woman's eyes rested a look that suggested otherwise. A weight of many nights, many cups of coffee, many conversations half remembered when the road took hold again. The driver rose, leaving a faint impression in the cushion that lingered a second too long after they'd stood. The bell above the door gave its small, tired jingle as they stepped back into the thinning fog. The air was sharper now, less muffled. Somewhere, far off, a bird called tentatively, uncertain if dawn was really on its way through all this gray. Crossing the lot, the driver noticed footprints on the damp pavement, their own, from earlier, clear and crisp. Beside them, running parallel for a few steps, was a second set, long, narrow impressions that didn't quite match any shoe or boot. They seemed to ripple along the surface, as if whatever had made them had been half submerged in the fog itself. With each second they faded, the moisture on the pavement drinking them away. The truck sat where it had been left, a familiar, solid shape. The driver climbed up, pausing just before pulling the door closed. From this vantage, they could see most of the lot. The diner's windows glowed with their warm, amber light. Behind one of them, the woman stood watching, her outline framed by hanging lamps. In a booth a little farther back, for the briefest pulse of a moment, the driver saw another figure, someone in a cap, head bowed over a mug. Then the light shifted, and the booth was empty. The cab door thunked shut. The engine turned over, rumbling to life, its sound somehow reassuring. The CB flickered softly, the green of its display calm and steady. The driver's hand hovered over its switch, then moved instead to the radio. Static greeted them. A slow twist of the knob, and faint music returned at last, a late-night station playing an old, gentle song that seemed to come from very far away. By the time the truck rolled back onto the highway, the fog had risen slightly, no longer hugging the road so tightly. Visibility improved by small degrees. The driver kept their eyes on the lane lines, letting the music fill the cab, letting the warmth from the vents ease the last of the chill from their fingers. For several miles, everything was ordinary. Wet road, quiet trees, the occasional reflective sign. The world felt like a place designed for human travel again, not a vast, listening corridor. Then, about 10 miles out, the CB crackled to life all on its own. The driver's hand jerked on the wheel. A voice, low and familiar, slipped through the speakers, softened by distance and static. "Hey there," it said, using the driver's old handle, one only a few close friends had ever used. "You missed a turn back there, don't you remember? Whisper Pines is the other way." The voice was wrong in its timing, wrong in its placement. It belonged to a man who'd been gone a long time, taken by a curve on a rainy night. His rig found with its headlights still cutting into the darkness. No footprints in the mud around it. The driver didn't reach for the mic. They didn't answer. They stared straight ahead, jaw set, and with a slow, deliberate motion flicked the CB off. The little green light died, the cab filling again with only the soft music and the engine's hum. Outside, the last strands of fog began to dissolve as a faint, colorless light touched the horizon. The forest along the road relaxed into its daylight shapes. If anything moved between the trees now, it did so as deer or raccoon, all ordinary shadows and fur and breath. The driver checked the mirrors. For a moment, in the side mirror's warped reflection, they thought they saw the lights of the Whisper Pines truck stop far behind, glowing softly in the fading fog. Just at the edge of that light, tall, pale things turned away, slipping back into whatever space waited between the trees and the road. Then the angle shifted. The mirror showed only empty highway in the gray light of morning. In the weeks and months to come, on other lonely nights and other long stretches of road, the driver would sometimes catch a faint amber glow on distant exits, a sign half buried in vines and fog, the hint of letters that might spell Whisper Pines. Each time, they would feel the pull of it, a desire for coffee, for warmth, for the strange safety of that place where the fog pressed at the windows but did not come in. And each time, they would remember the voice on the CB, the long, narrow impressions beside their own footprints, the way time had slipped oddly inside those walls. Then, with steady hands, They would choose their gear, set their speed, and decide whether to stop or to keep moving. Out there, with the things that paced just beyond the headlights, waiting for someone to miss a turn. Story number 2. The desert highway at night had a way of stretching time thin, pulling minutes long like taffy. Out here, the world was reduced to a handful of elements. The endless strip of asphalt, the low murmur of the engine, the rhythmic flash of the white markers on the roadside, and, tonight, a fog that did not belong in this landscape at all. It had rolled in quietly, almost politely, as the truck cleared the last cluster of gas stations and motels on the edge of a nowhere town. At first, it was just a faint veil above the sand, a curious shimmer that made the distant sagebrush look slightly out of focus. Then, mile by mile, it thickened. It rose in pale bands across the highway, climbed the truck's grill, and slowly engulfed the cab until the desert vanished, replaced by a soft gray cocoon. Inside, the dashboard glowed a comforting constellation of red and green indicators. The driver sat loosely in the seat, one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting against the door, fingers tapping a slow, aimless rhythm. The clock on the dash read 2:11 a.m. The CB was on but quiet, a low background hiss of static that sounded more like distant surf than voices. The radio station had faded away 20 miles back. Now, only a blank, soft rush lingered between stations. Fog in the desert was wrong, the driver thought, blinking slowly as the headlights painted tunnels in the gray. This road, Highway 19, usually baked under fierce sun by day and lay clear and sharp under star-thick skies at night. Dry air, cold wind, the faint glow of the Milky Way, those were its usual companions. Not this heavy, clinging mist that seemed to drink the light, swallowing the beams just past the hood and leaving the truck wrapped in its own little bubble of awareness. The driver rolled the window down an inch. The air outside was cold enough to sting the cheeks, carrying with it the dusty scent of sand and something damp and mineral, like the smell of wet stone in an underground tunnel. It didn't make sense. There were no lakes nearby, no rivers, no low-lying marshes, just scrub and rock and far-off ridgelines that should have been silhouetted against the sky had there been any sky left to see. They rolled the window back up. The world sealed again, warm and humming. The engine was a steady thrum beneath their feet, an almost soothing vibration. The steering wheel held a faint, constant tremor that told of the road's small imperfections, tiny ripples in asphalt, old patches, thin cracks beginning to form. The driver let their eyes drift from the faded center line to the edge markers and back, keeping a lazy but watchful rhythm. The first sign was almost an afterthought, a small green rectangle looming out of the fog before the headlights caught it fully. Mile 214, it read, slick with condensation. The driver frowned slightly. That number didn't fit. They should have passed mile 214 almost 40 minutes ago, somewhere back when the desert had still been visible and the sky had held a few scattered stars. 20 minutes later, another sign appeared. Mile 214. The driver's cheeks tightened briefly. It could be a mistake, a repetition, crews installing the wrong marker. It happened now and then. But something in the way the fog curled around that second sign, clinging to its edges like slow smoke, made the repetition feel less like an error and more like a quiet correction, as if the road itself were saying, "No, you are still here." They checked the odometer. The miles had been ticking normally, each tenth rolling into the next with patient precision. The clock, too, had advanced, 2:32 a.m. Time was moving. The world beyond the glass, however, had fallen into a loop. Another 20 minutes. The driver sipped lukewarm coffee from an insulated mug, tasting the faint metallic tang of its lid. Out of habit, they leaned forward a little in their seat as the fog thickened even more, pressing close, turning the high beams into a bright white wall directly ahead. Somewhere under the engine's rumble, a subtle unease began to coil. When the next sign emerged, the driver already knew what it would say. Mile 214. The reflective numbers glowing briefly in the headlights, then sinking back into the mist. The driver exhaled slowly, feeling the breath leave in a measured stream. The cab felt closer somehow, the roof an inch lower, the windshield a fraction smaller. They glanced at the dashboard again, searching for reassurance in the familiar array of gauges. Fuel, fine. Oil pressure, normal. Coolant temperature, steady. Everything under the hood existed in its usual calm logic. Outside, though, logic had taken a quiet step back. The CB hissed. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a change in the tone of the static. A slight rise, as if someone had adjusted a distant volume control. The driver's hand moved to the mic out of reflex, curling around its worn handle. They didn't press the talk button. Instead, they listened. At first, there was nothing distinguishable, only the soft oceanic wash of white noise. Then, beneath it, so faint they almost missed it, came a sound like a breath taken between words. 19. It was there and gone in a heartbeat. The driver's fingers tightened on the mic. They leaned a little closer. The fog pressed at the windshield as if it too were listening. The CB crackled again, the static shivering in a tight burst. This time a few syllables floated up through it, warped by distance and interference. Mile. 19. The driver swallowed once. Highway 19. They were on Highway 19. The road number had an odd way of embedding itself in the sound, like the voice was trying on its shape and finding it just a little too big. The tone didn't belong to anyone the driver recognized, and yet it had the familiar cadence of a trucker's easy drawl, casual, almost lazy, as if this were a normal conversation at a normal hour. The driver reached out and turned the CB volume down to a low murmur. Not off. They weren't ready to cut it entirely. The presence, whatever it was, retreated to the edge of hearing, where it mingled with the hum of the tires and the muted clatter of small items in the cup holder. The fog outside thickened until the highway became a suggestion more than a visible surface. The white line at the edge of the lane faded in and out, sometimes vanishing for a full second before reappearing, like a lifeline tossed in and out of a dark sea. Signposts, when they appeared, did so abruptly, their shapes smoothed by moisture. Each time, the driver's shoulders lifted in a small, anticipatory tension, braced for those reflective numbers. 1200. Again, the clock read 2:53 a.m. The odometer had advanced nearly 30 miles since the first 214. The driver loosened their grip on the wheel, flexing stiff fingers. Their pulse had picked up, not racing, but thudding in a way that suggested the body was quietly preparing for something. The desert beyond the shoulders of the road remained invisible, swallowed whole. There might have been a canyon 10 feet off the interstate, or endless dunes, or a sheer drop. The world had become only what the headlights could hold, and even that was suspect. Without quite intending to, the driver eased their foot off the accelerator. The truck's speed dropped several miles per hour, the engine note sinking a half step. The change was intimate, felt more than heard. The tires hummed more softly. The road, if it noticed the adjustment, gave no sign. The fog, however, seemed to respond, its texture shifting, closing in, as though the truck had passed through some unseen membrane. The CB startled them with a sudden, clear-edged burst of sound. "You're fine." The words slipped in so quietly that the driver might have imagined them. A suggestion more than a statement, carried on a thread of static. The voice was calm, almost reassuring. It had no notable accent, no identifiable age or gender, just a presence. "Just keep going." The driver's hand hovered over the CB dial, debating. The truck coasted along at a reduced speed, its headlights boring into the thick white ahead. In the mirror, there was nothing but their own red taillights, twin points of color in the gray, and then nothing beyond. No pursuing headlights, no distant glow of any town. They clicked the CB down just another notch, until the voice was barely there. A whisper behind glass. They didn't want to turn it off. Some part of them, ancient and practical, understood that even unsettling company was better than total isolation right now. "Mile marker 214, they murmured under their breath, as if naming it might pin it in place. As if that would somehow keep it from sliding back ahead of them, waiting to appear again. A small rectangular shape floated up out of the fog ahead. The driver exhaled before they could stop themselves, a soft, resigned breath. The sign came into focus, reflective paint glowing. 1200. The driver's lips moved around a silent word. Their fingers tapped the steering wheel. Faster now, the rhythm gone arrhythmic. Somewhere in the back of their mind, a quiet thought rose. What if they had never passed the first 214? What if the odometer and the clock and every practiced sense of distance and time had slipped, and it was only the signs that told the truth? They almost laughed at that. Almost. The sound caught in their throat and stayed there, turning into a small, dry cough. The CB offered another murmur, at just that moment, slipping through the crack like a letter pushed under a door. Long night. The words were clearer this time. The driver licked their lips, tasting the faint bitterness of old coffee on them. Their tongue felt dry, half numb. They pressed the talk button for the first time. "Copy that," they said, voice a little rough but steady. "Fog's a mess out here. You see any clearer air up ahead?" Static answered, but the quality of it had changed. It thickened somehow, took on a grain, as if something were trying to form consonants out of its white hiss. "You're fine." The same words, the same tone, the same curiously neutral warmth. "Just keep going." The driver released the button and stared straight ahead. Fog swirled in loose eddies just beyond the hood, curling in ways that suggested invisible currents. Now and then, something darker seemed to move within it, thicker tendrils that traced shapes like long, thin arms reaching out and then pulling back just before the headlights touched them. They thought of the desert that should be out there, wide and empty and starlit. Rock formations eroded into strange silhouettes, low washes carved by flash floods, the occasional jackrabbit darting across the road, caught in the beams for a single startled instant. Instead, there was only this enclosed, damp world and a mile marker that refused to move on. The next sign was bound to come eventually. The driver felt themselves begin to anticipate it, measuring distance not in actual metrics but in breaths and heartbeats. Every half-minute their gaze flicked forward just a fraction more intently. The fog revealed nothing until, as before, the rectangle blossomed out of the white, crisp at the edges. They almost didn't look, but their eyes, trained by thousands of miles of road, went to the numbers automatically. Mille iku zombesh. The driver let out a breath that was almost a laugh, sharp and quick. It sounded loud in the cab. 215. Movement. Change. The forward march of distance reasserted. They glanced at the clock. 3:14 a.m. The odometer. Another 10 miles, reluctantly acknowledged. Relief washed through them, subtle but real. Their shoulders loosened a fraction. The hand on the wheel ceased its quiet death grip. The CB settled into a softer, more ordinary hiss, as though whatever had been pressing against its channels had stepped back a little. They drove on. 2 miles. 5. 10. The fog thinned by degrees, little patches of clearer air appearing and then vanishing. The headlights reached a bit farther before being swallowed. The driver rolled one shoulder, then the other, feeling the stiffness like sand under the skin. Their mind began to wander again, as it did on long hauls, to tomorrow's delivery, to the little diner 2 towns over with the good pancakes, to the strange comfort of sleeping in the cab's narrow bunk with the engine ticking under the floor. Then, up ahead, another green rectangle appeared out of the mist, gliding into view as if pulled on a slow conveyor belt from some unseen source. The driver didn't know they were holding their breath until they were reading the numbers. Mille iku zondert. The air left their lungs in a muted, disbelieving exhale. The truck hummed steadily forward, but behind the glass, something in the driver's perception buckled. A slick feeling opened in their gut, as if the world had a trap door and they'd just stepped onto it. The clock read 3:28 a.m. They had been driving for over an hour since the first 214. The CB whispered, "See? You." The words slipped through so gently that they were almost kind. The hair on the driver's arms lifted under their jacket. They switched the CB off. The sudden absence of its hiss left the cab eerily quiet. Only the engine remained, and the low roar of the tires, and the occasional faint rattle of a spoon in the cup holder as the truck hit a minor imperfection in the road. The silence felt heavier, not lighter. It encouraged other sounds to surface. The soft click of the turn signal lever as the driver's hand brushed it, the barely audible whine of air against the side mirrors, the muted creak of the seat frame as weight shifted. Outside the windshield, the fog pulsed. That was the only way the driver could describe it. Not a constant density, but a slow in and out breathing. It thickened, then thinned, then thickened again, in a rhythm that felt just a hair too slow to match any human lung. The truck pushed through it at 60 miles an hour, yet it always seemed to ooze back into place behind, as if the vehicle were stationary and the fog was flowing around it. They considered stopping, pulling over to the shoulder, setting the brake, letting the engine idle until dawn. Maybe the fog would lift with daylight. Maybe other cars would appear, show them that this stretch of asphalt obeyed the same rules as all the others. Another shape resolved ahead, a larger, squarer shadow than the mile markers, too big to be just another sign. It grew as the truck approached, taking on more definition. A structure. Relief smoothed some of the tension in the driver's chest. A rest area. The old one. They recognized it slowly, pieces of memory snapping into place as the building's lights came into view. Faded brickwork. A low, sprawling layout. A tall flagpole out front with no flag. They remembered stopping here years ago, long before the fog, on a blistering afternoon when the heat had shimmered off the asphalt and the metal picnic tables had burned the palms of their hands. Now, the same rest area emerged from the mist like an island, its sodium vapor lamps casting cones of dull orange that failed to penetrate more than a few yards beyond the curbs. The outlines were all the same, but the details had shifted with time. The paint on the curbs was more cracked. The map kiosk's plexiglass panel had clouded. The vending machines under the awning stood darker, some of their displays unlit. The driver signaled out of habit and guided the truck into the rest area's entrance lane. The tires crunched over gravel that had been flung loose over the years. The engine's echo bounced off the low building, coming back thinner, as if the walls absorbed more than they should. They parked in a long strip of spaces intended for large vehicles. No other rigs were there. No cars either. The lot was empty, its wide expanse wet-looking in the glow of the lamps, though no rain had fallen. The fog seemed thinner within the rest area, as if it respected its boundaries, slipping around the outer edges like water around a stone. The driver set the brake and cut the engine. The rumble ceased. For a moment, the ringing emptiness that followed made their ears feel overly large, as if they could catch more than they wanted. They sat for a beat, hands loose in their lap, listening. No distant highway hum, no chirp of insects strange for the desert even at this hour, no scrape of gravel under approaching footsteps, just the soft tick-tick-tick of the engine cooling and the faint hiss of the fog moving past unseen surfaces. Finally, with the same practical instinct that had kept them alive through blizzards and mountain passes, they unbuckled their seatbelt, grabbed their flashlight from the door pocket, and stepped down from the cab. The cold bit deeper out here. It slid through denim and into bone. The air tasted flat, almost metallic, as if it had spent too long in enclosed spaces. The fog in the parking lot came up only to the driver's knees, a low, pale river that obscured their boots. It curled around the tires, around the concrete parking blocks, around the posts of the lamp posts, making it look as though everything was planted not in earth, but in clouds. The rest area building loomed ahead, its glass doors reflecting dull orange circles. The driver walked toward it, muffled by the thick air. Each step sounded slightly delayed, as if the noise had to push through an extra layer before reaching their own ears. The automatic sliding doors did not open at their approach. They stopped a few feet away, frowning. The motion sensor should have picked them up. Instead, the doors remained stubbornly shut, the interior of the building visible but dim hallway, vending alcove, a bulletin board with curling papers. The driver reached out and touched the glass. It was colder than expected, bordering on icy. Their fingertips left clear smudged ovals on the condensation. For a moment, as their breath fogged the pain, they thought they saw another set of fingerprints appear from the other side, opposite their own, longer, narrower, arranged in an unfamiliar pattern. They blinked. The interior remained empty. No one inside. No handprints. Only the faint reflection of their own face, bleached and slightly skewed by the glass. "Come on," they muttered softly, more to themselves than the doors. "Just want to stretch my legs." They stepped sideways, searching for a manual handle. There was none. Only the seam where the two glass panels met. Behind them, the fog swirled lazily at ankle level, moving with a mindless patience. The driver turned, scanning the lot. Their rig sat where they'd left it, a dark, familiar presence. Beyond it, the entrance lane faded into wall of white. A small rectangular shape caught their eye to the right. Another sign, this one low, and mounted on a single post near the building. "You are here, mile 214, rest area 19B. The map etched onto the sign showed their location as a tiny red dot on a long, straight line. The driver stared at that 214, feeling it land with a dull weight. The number no longer felt neutral. It had accumulated meaning like a word repeated until it warped. A soft sound came from behind the glass. Footsteps, slow, measured, somehow offbeat, as if whoever was walking did not quite understand the rhythm of human gait. They approached the doors, then stopped just on the other side of the fogged pane. The driver's breath hitched. They could see something. A tall shape, more a distortion than a figure, standing in the dim interior. Where its head should be, the reflected ceiling lights bent oddly, curving around an absence. Its outline flickered slightly like heat mirage on pavement. A voice slid through the glass. "You're fine." It was the same voice from the CB. Closer now, fuller, but still disconcertingly neutral. It could have belonged to anyone, or no one. "Just keep going," it added, as fog laced within the building, flowing around the shape's indistinct ankles. The driver's hand tightened on the flashlight. They did not turn it on. Some instinct held them back, as if additional light might reveal more than they were prepared to see. "Rest areas closed." The voice continued after a slow, unnatural pause. The words moved correctly. The spaces between them did not. "Roads clear up ahead. No need to stop." The tone suggested it was doing them a favor. Suggesting. Coaxing. The driver looked again at the building beyond the glass. No bathrooms, no vending machines, no water fountains. Only a long, dim corridor that seemed to stretch much farther back than the rest area's footprint allowed, lined with doorways that opened into deeper, thicker fog. "Appreciate it," the driver said quietly, voice steady. "Think I'll just take a minute anyway." The shape behind the glass remained still, watching without eyes. "Mile marker 214, it said, as if offering a warning, or a promise. The driver stepped back. The fog at their feet swirled as though stirred by an unfelt breeze. The urge to get back into the cab rose sharp and insistent, cutting through the fatigue and the confusion. Whatever this was, whatever had hold of this stretch of road, the truck was still theirs, their space, their rules. They turned away from the doors. As they did, the voice came one last time, softer now, muffled by distance and glass. "We'll see you again." Not a threat. Not exactly. More like the assurance of a schedule, of a recurring appointment on a calendar. Only the highway kept. The walk back to the rig felt longer than the one to the building, though the distance was the same. The fog seemed to cling a bit more, its low tendrils stroking against the driver's boots like curious fingers. Lights hummed overhead, casting elongated shadows that didn't quite match the shapes that made them. When they climbed into the cab and shut the door, the sound of it closing was astonishingly loud. It reverberated through the frame, then settled. The air inside the truck felt different now, warmed by their own breath, carrying faint traces of diesel and coffee and the comforting fabric smell of the sleeper behind the seats. They did not turn the CB back on. The engine rumbled to life, its vibrations traveling up through the seat into their bones. The rest area slid past the side windows as they steered out, its building a dim blur. For a moment, in the mirror, they thought they saw several tall, thin shapes standing just beyond the reach of the lamps, arranged in a loose semicircle around the glass doors. Watching, waiting, then the angle shifted, and there was only fog. Back on the highway, the world narrowed once more to a tunnel of white and the black ribbon beneath. The driver held the wheel with both hands now, their attention honed. The engine's sound became a mantra, a steady, reliable thing. They watched for the next mile marker with a strange anticipation, the way one waits for the punchline of a joke in a language they barely understand. When the sign appeared, it did so almost shyly, edges softened by damp. Mille zombesh. They allowed themselves a slow, quiet breath. The clock ticked to 3:47 a.m. Time moved. Distance, grudgingly, acknowledged itself. The fog did not vanish, but it changed. It lifted a few inches off the ground, revealing more of the road's surface, the faint texture of its aggregate, the slight color variations where repairs had been made. Above, it remained thick, muting the sky, but small glimpses of a paler, less oppressive darkness began to peek through. They drove. 1200, 1200. Each new number felt like a foothold on a steep climb. The CB remained dark, silent. The rest area receded into the unreality of rear-view mirrors and bad dreams. Once, in the periphery of their high beams, the driver thought they saw a low, crouched shape pacing the edge of the highway, just out of full sight. Long limbs, too many joints. The fog blurred it before any clear impression could form. At 4:12 a.m., a faint line of light appeared on the horizon. Not sunrise, not yet, but a softening of the black, a suggestion of color waiting behind the curtain. The fog, sensing the coming day, began to unravel. Its thick bands thinned into wisps. Patches of clear air widened between them. The desert slowly revealed itself. Low shrubs, rock outcroppings, distant darker smudges that might be hills. The driver rolled the window down again. Cold air rushed in, pure and dry this time, carrying sand and sage and nothing else. It scoured the remnants of the damp, underground smell from their nose. They inhaled deeply, feeling their chest expand with it. They didn't see mile marker 218. They saw 219 and 220 and 221. The numbers resumed their expected sequence, as if nothing had ever been wrong. As if the road had not doubled back on itself, in quiet, unacknowledged loops, folding that one specific stretch of distance over and over like a page in an old book. By the time the sun broke fully over the eastern horizon, painting the desert in soft gold, the fog was gone. Only a few ragged strands clung to the shadows of rocks and shrubs, dissolving as light touched them. The highway ahead lay clear and straight, its lanes stretching on with the easy promise of ordinary travel. The driver glanced at the CB. Their hand hovered over the switch, considered, and then moved away. Not today. Not for a while. Later, at a truck stop full of noise and people and the clatter of dishes and the hiss of grills, they would mention the fog to another driver. Came out of nowhere, they'd say. Hung around for miles. Spooky stuff. The other driver would nod, chewing thoughtfully on a forkful of eggs. Highway 19'll do that sometimes, they'd reply. You know they shut down an old rest area out there a couple of years back? Mile 214. Said it was falling apart. Folks kept getting turned around, couldn't find their way back to the highway. Confused, you know. Must be something about that spot. The driver would raise their coffee cup, hiding the brief tightening of their mouth on its rim. They wouldn't mention the voice, or the way time kinked, or the tall, thin shapes in the mirrors. Some experiences fit better in silence than in words. But on certain nights, long after, when the route planner showed a run along that same highway, and the forecast hinted at unusual humidity in the desert, they would find other roads. Detours, longer ways around, just in case. And if, somewhere out there in the dark, a CB crackled to life on its own, and a neutral, almost kind voice said, "You're fine, just keep going," there would be no one on Channel 19 to hear it. Only the fog, and the empty rest area, and the gently patient mile marker 214, waiting for the next set of headlights to break through the gray. Story number 3. The mountains rose like sleeping giants against the sky, their black silhouettes jagged and soft at the same time, softened by distance and a creeping veil of cloud. The highway wound between them in long, careful curves, clinging to the slopes before dipping into valleys and climbing again. It was a road that demanded respect, even in daylight. Sharp drop-offs hidden just beyond the guardrails, narrow shoulders, and stretches where rock slides had left scars that road crews patched as best they could. At 2 in the morning, in late autumn, with fog pooling low in the ravines and drifting up across the asphalt, it felt like a road that had been built for no one at all. The truck's headlights carved twin cones through the damp darkness, their beams catching wet guardrail posts, and the occasional reflective sign that floated into view and vanished just as quickly. The driver kept their speed conservative, their hands relaxed but attentive on the wheel. The engine pulled steadily on the climb, its low, determined rumble vibrating through the floorboards into the soles of their boots. Outside, the world was reduced to fragments. The pale face of a rock wall brushing past on the left, a brief glimpse of abyss on the right, where the shoulder dropped into a valley filled with cloud, the slick shine of the road ahead, beads of moisture sparkling in the light. Every few minutes, the fog would thicken abruptly, rising from the ravine like breath, turning the world beyond the windshield into a swirling, luminous white. Then, just as suddenly, it would thin, revealing the black bones of the mountains against a starless sky. The driver had run this route often enough to know its rhythm. The long left-hand sweeper past the old quarry, the short straight that ended in a tight right-hander by the mile 118 marker, the narrow bridge over the creek that no one ever saw in the dark, only heard as a hollow change in the sound of the tires. They liked this road in a strange way. It was lonely, yes, but its curves were familiar, its dangers known quantities. Tonight, though, something was different. It wasn't just the fog, though the fog was stranger and thicker than usual, its density changing, not with altitude or weather patterns, but seemingly in response to the truck's movement. It wasn't just the lack of stars, though the sky felt unusually blank, as if someone had draped a dark cloth over the heavens. It was a feeling, a low, insistent note that had been humming under the skin since they'd passed the last town. The feeling of being followed, not by another vehicle. The mirrors showed nothing but the truck's own red taillights reflected in the mist. Not by some recognized threat, no reckless driver, no curious patrol car, no animal pacing the shoulder. This was subtler. It manifested in the way the hairs at the nape of the driver's neck stood on end, in the occasional, inexplicable urge to check the blind spots even when they knew the highway behind them had been empty for miles. They rolled one shoulder, then the other, as if they could shrug the sensation off. The movement was small but grounding. Fabric rustled softly against the back of the seat. The cab was warm, faintly smelling of coffee and the lingering ghost of fast food. The dash lights glowed in subdued blues and greens, comforting little islands of color in the dark. The CB sat quiet on the console, its orange display showing the default channel. Earlier in the evening, there had been chatter weather updates, little jokes, mile marker callouts. That had tapered as the road climbed into the mountains. Now, static was all that remained, a fine grain hiss too faint to be intrusive, too present to ignore entirely. The driver took a sip from a travel mug. The coffee had gone lukewarm, its taste more about habit than flavor now. They set it back into the holder and glanced out at the next bend in the road, a long right curve that hugged the edge of a gorge. On clearer nights, you could look down into it and see the ribbon of creek far below, glinting faintly in the distant light of towns beyond the next ridge. Tonight, the gorge was filled to the brim with fog, a soft, white lake that appeared motionless from above. As the truck entered the curve, the fog rose up and over the guardrail in slow motion, spilling onto the road like a living thing. The driver eased off the accelerator, feeling the slight gravitational tug of the curve against the truck's mass. The beams of the headlights dissolved 4, 5, 6 truck lengths ahead, leaving only a glowing wall. In that luminous white, a shape appeared. At first, it was only a darker smudge, hanging just within the range of the lights. Then, as the truck moved closer and the curve brought it into a better angle, It resolved into the vague outline of another vehicle. Tail lights glowed faintly red, softer than they should have been, diffused by the mist. The bulk of a trailer hovered behind them, colorless in the fog, more texture than form. The driver's brows drew together slightly. That wasn't possible. No headlights had appeared in the mirrors for half an hour. No sign of a rig on the CB. Yet there it was. A truck, moving ahead at roughly the same speed. Its lights, like the memory of illumination, more than actual sources. They eased back a touch more, letting a bit of distance build. The fog swallowed most of that distance, reducing the other rig to a vague, floating cluster of pale red. The road continued its curve, then straightened. The mountains closed in, their unseen masses pressing closer. The driver's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around the wheel. They reached for the CB mic without thinking. "Breaker 19, they said, voice steady, filling the cab's quiet. "Got a rig ahead of me up here in the soup. You reading me?" Static answered, with no real variation. The driver waited a heartbeat longer, then pressed the talk button again. "Come on now, you're right in front of me. Give me a holler, friend." Nothing. The tail lights ahead remained at the same hazy distance, neither drawing away nor closing. They glowed with a softly pulsing quality, not perfectly steady. If the driver squinted, they could almost see the suggestion of edges around them, two oblong shapes that didn't quite match the standard pattern of brake lights, as if someone had tried to imitate them without fully understanding the design. The road began to climb in a long, steady grade. The engine note deepened. The driver shifted down, not wanting to lug the motor. As the truck settled into its new lower gear, the following sensation intensified. Something about the way that pale rig ahead moved was wrong. Its trailer did not sway with the turns quite as a real one would. Its wheels, when the driver could briefly see their faint shadow through the fog, seemed to barely kiss the asphalt. Mile marker 123 slid past, its numbers briefly illuminated, water droplets on its surface sparkling like tiny stars. The driver's eyes flicked to the right, then back. When they looked forward again, the rig ahead had drawn just a little closer than before, without any change in apparent speed. Details emerged. The trailer was old, an older design, with slightly rounded edges and a faded logo on the side that the fog smudged into indecipherable shapes. The cab was boxier than most on the road today, its outline suggesting square angles and a shorter nose. The driver tried to fix the logo in their mind. There was a circle, maybe, and something that could have been wings, or leaves, or flames. Every time they thought they had it, the fog drifted and blurred it. The taillights, though, held their attention the most. They should have been comforting. Another pair of human-guided lights cutting through the dark. Instead, they felt indifferent. They did not brighten or dim with the subtle speed adjustments trucks constantly made. They did not flicker with bumps. They simply glowed, steady and soft, as if painted onto the mist itself. The CB crackled, a tiny rise in volume, like a breath taken close to the ear. Copy. The word was so faint the driver might have dismissed it as imagination. But they had spent too many years on the road to mistake the texture of a voice, even one thinned by distance. Their thumb found the talk button by reflex. "Say again," they asked, eyes fixed on the ghostly rig ahead. Static then. Long night. The tone was tired, yes, but in a way that didn't quite map to human fatigue. It sounded more like erosion, like something that had been worn down by time rubbing against it for too many years. "Sure is," the driver answered quietly. The cab felt smaller, the air closer. "Didn't see you catch up to me. Where'd you come from?" The pause that followed was not like the usual breaks in CB chatter. It was too precise, held for just the length of a human breath, then released, as if someone had learned the pattern but not the purpose. "Just behind." The driver glanced in the side mirror. Out there, swallowed by fog, no headlights burned. Only darkness, and the faint rebound of their own rear markers. Off the mist. "Negative," they said before they could overthink it. "You're in front of me, partner. I've been watching your taillights for a couple miles now." Silence. Then, after a few moments, a soft rasp of sound that could have been the beginning of a chuckle or a cough. or the crackle of old plastic under strain. Long night, the voice repeated, as if trying the words on again. Foggy. The truck ahead drifted slightly toward the center line, then corrected, though there was no visible input from a driver. Its movements were smooth but just off sync enough to suggest a puppet pulled on nearly invisible strings. The driver's fingers tingled faintly. They flexed them around the wheel. They had heard stories, of course. Any trucker who spent enough nights on mountain roads picked up tales like Burr's half-whispered accounts traded over counter coffee or in patchy CB conversations. Stories of rigs that no longer belonged to anyone living, seen floating in the distance on the worst nights. Stories of accidents that left no skid marks, no logical explanation except that someone had followed the wrong set of lights, trusted the wrong truck into a turn that wasn't there. They had always listened politely, filed the tales away in the same mental drawer as ghost stories and tall fishermen's yarns. You smiled, you nodded, you changed the subject. Then you went back out on the road and put your faith in physics and experience. Now, the drawer felt less theoretical. "Which outfit you runnin'?" the driver asked, trying to sound casual. Their own voice sounded too loud in the cab, too sharp against the soft hiss of tires on wet pavement. "Ain't seen that logo in a while." Ahead, the pale tail lights did not waver. "Been here." The words seeped through the speaker like water through cracks. They seemed to press against something, to strain, as if whatever was speaking them had to push not just through distance, but through some thicker barrier. No carrier name followed. No laugh. No comment about the weather, the grade, the fog. The road continued its climb, then leveled out onto a long, narrow plateau. On clearer nights, this stretch offered a view across the whole valley, town lights twinkling far below like fallen stars. Tonight, there was only a diffuse bluish nothingness on either side of the guardrails, an absence that made the driver's stomach clench if they looked at it too long. The sense of being followed had twisted. Now it felt as though they were the one doing the following and being led. The rig ahead maintained its uncanny distance. It did not appear on the GPS screen, which showed only the truck's own position creeping along a thin line between topographic contours. The little arrow representing their cab moved forward. The screen scrolled dutifully. Yet there was no second arrow, no indication of a vehicle within the program's awareness. The driver glanced once at the passenger seat, where an old paper atlas sat half buried under a jacket. The corners of its pages were soft with use. A thought rose: pull over somewhere. Check the map. Make sure the road hadn't quietly changed under them. But where would they pull over? The shoulders here were narrow. The fog made any sudden stop inviting disaster, whether natural or otherwise. They chose a different question instead. "You run this road often?" they asked into the CB, leaning slightly toward the mic. "These curves, this fog, they can be tricky. Don't want to let someone get too comfortable up front if they're sleeping on the wheel." A beat. 2. Then, road, the voice said thoughtfully, as if it were tasting the word. "The road is long." Something about the way it said road made the driver's skin prickle, as if the concept was both intimately familiar and fundamentally strange to whoever or whatever spoke. "You got that right," the driver replied. "You got a handle?" Static, a faint warble, like distant feedback. "Come along," the voice murmured. Not quite an answer. The driver's gaze went back to those pale red lights. They were too inviting, too easy to focus on. On a night like this, when fog erased the landscape and the road's edge was a guess at best, it was tempting to let those lights become a guide, follow their glow, match their movements, trust that the driver ahead knew what they were doing. The stories came back more fully now. People talked about it like a warning whispered over plates of eggs and bacon. "Don't follow the ghost rigs," they'd say. "Don't let them take you off the road. Look at the asphalt, not at the lights." The driver peeled their eyes away with conscious effort. Instead, they focused on what they could see of the lane, the faint contrast between the wet, dark center and the slightly paler strip where other tires had passed. The right-hand fog line, bright white when it appeared, then gone, then there again. The muted gleam of the rumble strip, just visible as a subtle texture change. Ahead, the spectral truck took a gentle left curve with practiced ease. The driver forced themselves to take it on their own terms, aiming at the center of the lane instead of relying on the other rig's mysterious path. Their hands moved with practiced confidence, even as their mind hummed with unease. The CB clicked softly, unprompted, more static. Then, under it, a sound that was not quite a voice, a layered murmur that suggested many people speaking at once, all saying different things too quietly to distinguish. In that soft chorus, one phrase floated up just enough to be heard. Missed the turn. The driver's heart gave a tight, quick squeeze. That particular phrasing echoed something they'd heard long ago, on another night, from another cab, an offhand comment between two drivers about a collision on this very road. Guy followed a rig too close in the fog, one had said. Missed his own turn. Or maybe the truck in front of him never took it. You on 19? The driver asked, using the common channel number like a password. You know this stretch? The hazy rig ahead glided through another soft bend. The fog swirled around it in patterns that did not quite match the usual eddies around a moving object. Occasionally, for a few seconds, the taillights seemed to stretch, elongating into narrow streaks that then snapped back into their usual shape. I'm on the road, the voice said eventually. Been on the road, long time. The driver swallowed. The coffee in their stomach felt suddenly cooler, heavier. You know there's a runaway truck ramp up ahead, they said, partly to fill the space, partly out of an odd sense of obligation, as if some human part of them still wanted to warn whoever was nominally at the other end of this. Steep grade after that. Gotta watch your brakes. Can't ride 'em all the way down. The pause this time stretched longer. The CB hissed. The engine hummed. The fog pressed. The mountain road bore them onward, obedient to its unseen curves. Finally the voice returned, softer than before. Didn't stop. The words hung in the air like frost. They were not entirely an answer, and yet they fit too well into the spaces of those old stories. The driver found their thumb edging toward the CB's power switch. They hesitated. Turning it off would cut that eerie thread. It might also cut their only contact with something that could warn them if it chose to. The balance between wanting to know and not wanting to know shifted and tilted. They eased their foot back slightly, letting the truck fall another car length behind. The pale rig ahead compensated, without visibly accelerating, its distance remaining maddeningly consistent. The driver's jaw clenched. Their eyes burned with the strain of staring into fog for so long, the muscles around them tight. On the paper atlas in their memory, there was a rough turnout somewhere around 128, a small scenic overlook on the right, used mostly in the day by tourists wanting a photo op. In the dark and the fog, it would be more of a risk than a refuge, but the idea of grounding themselves in a fixed place, of physically stepping away from this strange, drawn-out line of road, grew quietly appealing. How long you been up? The driver asked, trying to keep the conversation anchored in something mundane. Can't be safe to run this mountain half asleep, Static answered. Then unexpectedly, another voice surfaced under the first. This one was thin, frayed, like an old recording played too many times. Too long. The driver's fingers went cold around the mic. Two voices, or one voice layered over its own echo, separated by years. You ever make it off this road? The driver heard themselves ask, surprising even their own ears with the intensity behind the question. The pale taillights flared slightly then, as if reacting to something the fog had done, not to anything the truck had physically encountered. The spectral rig's trailer tilted a hair to the right, then corrected, in a motion that suggested no friction at all, no weight, no mass interacting with asphalt. Just missed the turn. It was the same phrase again, but this time it carried more weight, as though an entire story clung to those four simple words. An exit forgotten, a curve mistaken, a ramp that came and went too quickly. For a brief, disorienting moment, the driver's vision stuttered. The white of the fog brightened, dimmed, brightened again, as if someone were flickering the world's brightness settings. In that flicker, they saw superimposed over the current road another image. A truck cab, crushed and twisted against a rock face, headlights still burning, fog curling gently through a broken windshield. It was there, then gone, leaving only after images in the mind. They released the CB mic. Their hand felt oddly heavy, like it belonged to someone else for a second. "Not my story," they said, voice rough, anchoring themselves to the here and now. The road began to descend. It was gradual at first, a long, easy downgrade. The mountains on either side retreated into softer slopes. Somewhere far below, water flowed, unseen but faintly heard in the occasional mutter of a river echo bouncing up the gorge. The driver checked their speed, then shifted to an appropriate lower gear, letting the engine help hold the load back. This was routine, mechanical, comforting. Their body knew these motions so well that they could have done them in their sleep. They focused on that. RPMs, gear ratios, brake pressure, reassuring numbers in a world where the mile markers and the things in the fog had stopped behaving. The pale rig ahead did not appear to change gears. Its descent was eerily smooth, its speed constant. The tail lights kept their gentle, unwavering glow, betraying no brake taps, no adjustments for grade. The grade steepened a little more. "Gotta watch it, friend," the driver said suddenly, not sure if they were talking to the thing ahead or themselves. "Hill's picking up. There's a curve at the bottom. You remember that curve, don't you?" The CB remained silent. The only answer was the growing sense of weight behind the truck, the subtle shift in balance as gravity pulled just a little harder. The driver's right foot hovered close to the brake, ready but disciplined. They would not ride it. They would pulse, as they had 1,000 times on 1,000 hills. The fog ahead brightened slightly, a pale haze suggesting some external light source. The driver recognized the effect. The runaway truck ramp's floodlights. They were coming up on the emergency escape lane. The spectral rig's taillights glided on, unbothered. "Now's your chance," the driver muttered under their breath. "You missed it once. Don't miss it again." The ramp appeared suddenly out of the mist on the right, a long, steep incline veering away from the main road, its bed of gravel waiting, lit by harsh white lamps. The driver's body responded automatically, glancing at speed, at position, at options. They were fine, under control, within safe limits. No need for that ramp. No need to abruptly throw 20 tons of cargo into a bed of rocks. But the rig ahead, it did not turn. It passed the mouth of the ramp as if it wasn't there. For a fleeting instant, the driver saw its pale outline partially overlapped with the bright entrance to safety, like two imperfectly aligned images. Then it was past, and the ramp's light slid by, leaving only the fog-soft darkness of the main road again. "Didn't stop," the voice breathed, almost inaudible. The driver's skin pebbled. They adjusted their own line, holding steady to the main lane, but their eyes tracked the spot where the spectral truck should have turned. The afterimage of that possible divergence burned in their mind. The grade continued. The engine brake chattered softly, holding most of the speed. The driver feathered the pedal now and then, keeping everything within the zone they knew by heart. Despite that, their heart rate climbed, not in response to any physical threat, but to the intangible weight of the story unfolding around them. Fog thickened near the bottom of the grade, forming a dense, luminous band. The curve there was deceptive, a wide left that tightened just enough at the end to surprise anyone not respecting it. On clear nights, you could see the ghostly outlines of old skid marks veering toward the guardrail. On nights like this, you saw only white. The spectral rig entered the fog bank first. For a second, its taillights glowed through the mist like two dim stars behind a gauzy curtain. Then, abruptly, they tilted. The trailer's aft end swung slightly toward the right shoulder, too fast, too far. The driver saw the red smudges of the lights slide sideways relative to the road. No brake flare, no corrective pulse. The whole shape twisted in a way that did not respect inertia. Then, with a soft, almost embarrassed shudder in the fog, the rig was simply gone. The space where it should have been lay empty. The curve continued ahead, unoccupied. The road, the fog, the guardrail, all were exactly where they belonged, as if nothing had disturbed them. Only the echo of motion remained, a ghost impression in the air. The driver's stomach clenched. They held their own line meticulously through the curve, eyes locked on the faint path of the lane. Their body made the micro-adjustments needed to compensate for grade and centrifugal force. Their hands did not tighten or shake. Years of habit took the controls. As they emerged from the densest part of the fog, the aftermath of whatever they had half-witnessed clung like a film. A patch of guardrail on the right looked slightly different than the rest, duller, newer, its reflectors a shade brighter. The road surface at its base bore faint scars, lines where something heavy had once skidded, then been repaired with fresh asphalt. The driver's eyes flicked to those details, then away, then back. The CB, untouched, crackled one last time. Long night. Missed the turn. The voice was distant now, as if it were being carried away down some side road the truck could no longer see. Layered under it, nearly inaudible, came another sound. The distant rush of wind, the creak of straining metal, and then nothing. The driver reached over and turned the CB off with a firm, quiet motion. Silence folded into the cab, thick but not entirely unwelcome. The engine's hum became the main sound again, steady and grounding. The fog began to thin as the road leveled out into the valley, the clinging clouds dissolving into scattered patches that clung to tree lines and creek beds. Stars appeared overhead, cautious at first, then in greater numbers. They used to be there all along, just hidden. Now their cold, clean light pricked through the sky, indifferent to whatever moved along the human-cut roads below. The driver eased their shoulders down, one at a time, rolling out some of the tension. The feeling of being followed lessened, though it did not vanish entirely. It reshaped itself into something more familiar. The sense of unseen drivers on other roads, in other cuts through other mountains, all sharing the same general journey. Mile marker 131 passed. The truck rolled on. At the next wide, well-lit turnout won by a small ranger station with a couple of parked pickups and a closed visitor center, the driver pulled off. Gravel crackled under the tires. They set the brake and let the engine idle for a moment, the low thrum becoming background music. Outside, the air was colder and clearer. The fog here had retreated to low patches over the grass, glowing silver in the starlight. The driver stepped down from the cab and stretched, their joints popping quietly. The mountain air tasted clean, sharp, carrying the scent of pine and distant wood smoke. They walked to the edge of the turnout, where a wooden fence separated the gravel from a steep slope. Beyond, the valley opened up, a dark bowl lined with faint tree silhouettes. Far below, the river glimmered, catching just enough starlight to draw a thin, moving line. It was beautiful, ordinary, real. Behind them, on the highway, a single pair of headlights appeared far up the grade, tiny pinpricks weaving slowly down through the last lingering threads of fog. A real truck this time, by the look of the way its lights bounced and shifted. Its engine noise floated faintly on the air, a distant, comforting growl. The driver watched it for a moment, then looked back up the mountain, toward the curve and the runaway ramp and the stretch of road where the spectral rig had vanished. The darkness there was complete. Nothing moved. The mountain simply sat, vast and quiet, as it had for eons before roads, before trucks, before stories. They thought of the faded logo on that ghost trailer's side, the almost familiar pattern. Later, when they checked at home, they would find an old trucking company name in a worn directory, a carrier that had gone out of business years earlier, after one of their rigs went off this very grade in bad weather. The logo would match closely enough to stir something in the chest. But that was later. For now, the driver climbed back into the cab, closed the door with a solid thunk, and let the warmth seep back into their fingers. They watched the approaching real truck glide by on the highway, its headlights clear, its trailer's reflective tape bright and sharp, a human presence at the wheel, a man with a cap pulled down low, visible for a second in the opposing cab's glow. He lifted 2 fingers off the wheel in a lazy salute. The driver of the parked rig returned it. Only after the other truck's taillights had faded entirely did they turn their CB back on. Static greeted them, ordinary and thin. No voices whispered under it, no strange layered murmurs. The channel felt empty even, in a strange way, a bit lonely. The driver hesitated, then pressed the mic button. "Any drivers out here on the east grade between 120 and 130? They asked more out of ritual than need. Fog's lifting. Roads clear far as I can see. A moment later, a voice came back, crisp, human, carrying that familiar blend of fatigue and dry humor. "Copy that," it said. "Just coming off the hill myself. Little thick up top, but not too bad. You doing all right out there?" The driver felt their shoulders drop another fraction. "Yeah," they said. "Long night. Foggy. Just watching the road." "Ain't that the truth?" the other replied. A soft chuckle then. "Keep it between the lines." They signed off. The world inside the cab felt normal again. Instruments, route plans, the faint background noise of distant channels. Yet something of the mountain lingered, some awareness that not every set of lights on a foggy grade belonged to a living driver with paperwork and a home base. In the years to come, on other foggy nights in other mountain passes, the driver would sometimes glimpse distant taillights ahead that moved in ways they didn't quite trust. They'd ease back, relying on the paint on the pavement and their own knowledge of the road, letting those pale glows slip further into the mist. And somewhere, along Highway 17 through the Eastern Range, drivers new to the route would hear a piece of advice passed along in careful, quiet tones. If you see a lonely rig ahead of you on the grade in the thick fog, and its tail lights don't quite blink when they should, don't follow too close. Don't let it lead you. Look at the lines, not at the lights. Because some trucks, they say, never made that last curve. They just kept going, long after the road ended, pulling anyone who trusted them a little too far into the white. Story number 4. The plains liked to pretend they were empty, especially at night. From the cab, it looked like nothing but flatness in every direction, a dark ocean of wheat stubble and fallow fields stretching to the edge of the world. No hills, no mountains, no clusters of trees big enough to be called a forest. Just a few lonely silhouettes, an old windmill here, a leaning barn there, a water tower with a town's name half faded off its side, and, above it all, a sky so huge it could swallow thoughts whole. On clear nights, the stars came down close enough to touch. Tonight, though, there were no stars. Only fog. It didn't make sense, not out here. Fog belonged to river valleys and coastal roads, not to dry, open farmland hours from any truly deep water. But it had rolled in sometime after midnight, starting as a thin, silvery haze over the furrows, then pooling low in the ditches, then climbing, until the highway itself lay under a soft, floating blanket. The truck moved through it like a ship through milk. The headlights cut 2 tunnels ahead, their beams swallowed into a thick white only a few dozen yards past the hood. The road's yellow center line glowed dimly, appearing and vanishing with each rise and dip in the blacktop. On either side, the world dissolved into softness a few feet from the shoulder, the fields and fence posts turning into smeared suggestions rather than things. Inside the cab, everything was clear and contained. The warm hum of the heater, the faint scent of coffee, diesel, and vinyl, the soft tick of a bug that had somehow gotten itself stuck in the dome light earlier in the evening. The dashboard lit the driver's hands in pale blues and greens. The steering wheel vibrated just enough to remind them of the weight they were guiding. The hum of the engine, low and steady, mixed with the almost musical note of the tires on the pavement. The driver glanced at the digital clock. 1:48 a.m. They had left the last town more of a wide spot with a diner and 2 gas stations nearly an hour ago. According to the route plan, there wouldn't be another real stop for 70 miles. Just this ribbon of 2-lane blacktop and the occasional farmhouse light, far off across the fields, floating alone like a lost star. The CB was on, but silent. Earlier, they'd heard a couple of drivers chatting about weather to the west, about a cold snap rolling in, maybe snow in the panhandles. That conversation had faded into distance and static, until all that remained was the low, sandy hiss that spoke of empty channels. The radio had given up even earlier. Station after station had dissolved into fuzz, then into nothing. The driver had turned the volume down rather than listen to the void. There was a difference between silence and dead air. One could be peaceful. The other felt like a door slightly ajar on a room no one had been in for a long time. Fog pressed around the cab, dense enough now that it seemed to glow faintly on its own, taking the headlights' beams and bending them back toward the windows. It clung to the side mirrors in delicate, shifting sheets, making the red glimmer of the taillights look distant and small when the driver checked their trailer. They cracked the window an inch, more out of habit than need, letting in a ribbon of cold air. It hit their cheek with a damp slap, surprising, given how dry the day had been. The smell that came with it was faint but distinct: wet soil, cut stalks, and something else harder to name. Not rot, not exactly, but the sad mineral scent of things that had been abandoned out in the weather for a long time. The driver rolled the window back up. The feeling crept in slowly. At first it was nothing more than a thickening of the air in their lungs, a tightness at the base of the neck, the subtle awareness that they were the only moving thing for miles. The way the fog erased the sky above and the land beside made it feel as if the truck were floating in a featureless void. There was no hint of town glow on the horizon, no passing farm lights, no faint sweep of a distant train's beams. They honed in on what remained. The road, the gauges, the quiet clack of the turn signal when they flicked it absent-mindedly while changing lanes to dodge an invisible pothole that never appeared. A green sign emerged from the fog, its surface glistening with moisture. The driver read it as it passed. Resteria, 12 miles. It felt almost like a promise whispered at the edge of hearing. 12 miles. A bit of light, a bathroom, a vending machine humming in the corner. Right now, that seemed enough. The truck ate up the distance in measured, easy bites. Mile markers slid by, each one a small reassurance that the world still moved forward in recognizable increments. 142, 143, 144. The driver counted along in their head, a private metronome. At mile 147, the world shifted. Not with a jolt, not with anything so obvious. It was more like stepping from one room into another without noticing the door. The fog thickened from white to a faintly gray-tinged density. The sound of the engine and tires dulled, as if padded. The gauges, and this was what snagged the driver's attention, dimmed a fraction, their usual crisp glow going slightly soft around the edges. They blinked, thinking at first that it was their eyes. Fatigue. A long day, now spilling into a longer night. They rubbed at one, then the other. The dashboard remained a touch less sharp. Not enough to worry about safety, but enough to prick at the part of the mind that noticed patterns. The CB crackled. It was a small sound at first, a brief rise in the static's pitch, like wind catching on a wire. The driver's gaze flicked toward it automatically. The orange channel number glowed steadily, the little indicator light politely reminding them it was on and listening. They waited a second, then another. Nothing but that faint, restless hiss. Then, just as they were about to label it nothing and mentally put it away, the hiss cleared. Underneath it, very soft, came the rhythmic rush of air over something. Not quite wind, not quite white noise. It had a vague, hollow quality, like breath moving through a long, empty hallway. The driver's hand went to the mic. They didn't pick it up. Not yet. "Anybody out here on 47 between 140 and 150? They asked the air instead, their voice unexpectedly loud in the cab. "Quiet night." The CB responded with a subtle rise and fall in its static, almost like a sigh. 47. The words slipped through so lightly that the driver could have blamed their imagination. But their brain, trained by years of half-heard transmissions, locked onto its cadence and timbre. Neutral, slightly flattened vowels, no strong accent, neither obviously male nor female. Words spoken by someone who didn't bother to lean into their own identity much. The driver's arms prickled. "Yeah," they said slowly, easing the truck around a long, gentle curve that the fog barely let them see. 47. "You on it too?" Silence went on long enough that they began to think that had been all. Then, "Been on it. A while." The voice dragged a little on "while," as though the concept itself were heavy. There was no background engine noise behind it, no soft rattle of a cup against a dash, none of the usual clutter of a truck cab, just that desert of sound emptiness. "Yeah, feels that way," the driver replied, watching the faint blurred glow of a farmhouse light drift by on the left and then get swallowed again. Fog, something else. You see it ahead of you too? Fog? The voice rolled the word around lazily. I see the fog every night. That phrasing slid in sideways, leaving the driver a little colder. They let the CB sit, not responding immediately. Instead, they focused on the next sign, a blue advance notice that loomed out of the white. Rest area, 2 miles. A small symbol of a bench under a tree. The simple little graphic seemed strangely intimate, almost kind in all this blankness. The driver checked the clock. 2:07 a.m. 12 miles in roughly 20 minutes. Normal. They could make out the faint shape of the rest area's lights ahead now. A dull orange glow diffused by fog, hovering low over the roadway like a campfire in the mist. The voice came again, floating up through the static. Rest areas closed. The driver's fingers, which had been resting loosely on the wheel, tightened just a notch. Say again, they asked. Sign says it's open. Got nowhere else on this stretch for a bit. A crackle. The hiss thickened for an instant, then thinned. Always closed. The voice was very calm. Not warning, not mocking, just stating. Lights stay on, doors stay locked. Folks go in, don't always come out. The last 4 words had a way of settling heavily in the seat beside the driver. They let out a breath through their nose, slow and controlled. It's a bathroom and a couple vending machines, they said, trying to keep it light. Not exactly a maze. You local? A beat. 2. I'm here every night. The phrase scratched delicately at something old in the driver's memory. They thought of the miles they'd run on this road before, the foggy nights when their mind had wandered. Had there been times when they'd caught a snatch of voice on the CB, this same even tone, without thinking about it? The rest area's exit sign appeared on the right, the arrow bright in the beams. Rest area, 1 mile. Below, in smaller letters, no services for 68 miles. The arrow pointed down a gently curving ramp that slipped away into thicker white. The driver's hand moved toward the turn signal. Their body had already decided on the stop. Stretch, use the restroom, splash water on their face. Small rituals that kept the night manageable. The CB's speaker crackled softly, like someone leaning in closer to it. You get tired enough, the voice said conversationally. You go in there and sit down for a minute. Maybe just close your eyes. Listen to the vending machines hum. Listen to the fans. You think, just a quick rest. And the fog's right up against the glass and you don't notice how long you sit. The driver didn't flip the signal. The ramp's white line slid by under the right corner of the windshield, then steadied in their peripheral vision. The glow of the rest area grew a fraction brighter, its lamps pushing little orange pools into the mist. You don't sound too tired, the driver said carefully. You sound like you've been practicing that story. The laugh that came back was quick and dry and not quite comfortable. Been around, the voice said. Seen folks pull in, seen 'em not come back on the road. You at the rest area now? I'm on 47. That was not an answer, and yet it was. The driver's mind flicked to the map. Highway 47 cut across the plains in a long, gentle arc. They'd been down this road for years. The rest area, just Rest Area 47 on the trucker forums, had popped up in conversations now and then. Strange hours. People complaining about losing time. A lot of, weird, and then moving on. Fog coiled around the truck, thicker near the ground. The faint impression of another vehicle's tracks appeared briefly on the wet shoulder before blurring out. The driver's shoulders had begun to creep up toward their ears without them noticing. They rolled them back down, pushing breath down into the bottom of their lungs. The green exit sign took shape in the mist, then sharpened. Rest Area 47, exit only, it proclaimed. Below, a small additional panel. No truck parking beyond 8 hours. Its metal pole was beaded with moisture, the water making it glisten as if it were sweating. The driver flicked the turn signal on. It was an almost defiant act, though it didn't feel like one. It felt like choosing the real, the tangible, over the ghostly suggestions on the airwaves. There was a bathroom there, with tile and fluorescent lights, and the smell of disinfectant. There was a parking area, with lines painted on asphalt, and trash cans placed at intervals. They'd stopped at 100 places like it. Whatever this voice was, it couldn't change the fact that the building would be solid under their hand. Could it? The ramp curved gently downward, the fog thickening as if more of it had pooled there, drawn into the slight depression. The truck's engine note changed as the load shifted. The tires whispered over less worn pavement, the sound slightly smoother. The rest area appeared by degrees. First the tall lights, their orange halos diffused. Then the low shape of the main building, a squat rectangle with small rectangular windows glowing weakly. Then the long looping parking lanes, empty except for a couple of dark, indistinct sedans near the car side. The driver turned off toward the truck parking area. The lamps cast enough light that the edges of things became clear curbs, picnic tables, an information kiosk with maps behind glass. The fog hung low between them, like ground-hugging smoke, but the structures themselves were ordinary. They pulled into a space facing the building and set the brake. The engine's vibration faded into a ticking silence. For a moment they sat there, hands still on the wheel, listening. The hiss of the CB was a soft, continuous undercurrent. On top of it, their own breathing sounded too loud. "Looks open to me," they said at last, not quite sure why they were responding to the voice at all. "Lights on, no barricades. You ever thought maybe you just don't like rest areas?" Static remained static for several seconds. The driver's hand tightened once on the steering wheel, then released. Outside, a breeze picked up, subtle but present, moving the fog in thin, curling ribbons. Then, quietly, "You hear how quiet it is?" The driver shut their eyes for a heartbeat, then opened them. They thumbed the CB volume down almost to nothing, not off, but low enough that the voice would have to strain to reach them. Then they grabbed their flashlight from the door pocket, shrugged on their jacket, and opened the door. Cold, damp air rushed in, bringing with it the muffled silence of the fog-draped lot. The slam of the door as they closed it behind them reverberated in the stillness, then faded quickly, as if the mist itself absorbed the sound. Their boots crunched lightly on the wet gravel scattered at the edge of the asphalt. The frosting of moisture on the pavement made it look almost glossy, reflecting the orange lamp glow in smears. The fog hugged their shins, swirling with each step, parting reluctantly and closing in again a moment later. The rest area building loomed ahead, its brick walls darkened by damp. A row of big windows showed a bland, familiar interior, vending machines against the far wall, a few molded plastic chairs bolted to the floor, a bulletin board with flyers and notices. A single plant in a pot slouched melancholically under a fluorescent fixture. Automatic sliding doors faced the lot. Above them, a green sign, "Welcome, Rest Area 47. Its letters were clean, recently replaced. The glass below shone with a fine film of condensation. The driver approached, watching their reflection resolve on its surface. A tall figure in a jacket and cap, edges softened by moisture. As they reached the sensor's range, the doors did not move. They frowned faintly and stepped closer. The sensor, a small dark rectangle above the door, stared back. No welcoming hum, no mechanical slide. The driver stood a foot away now, breath fogging the glass. Through the misting, they could see the interior clearly. The vending machines were on. Little LEDs blinked cheerfully on their displays. The clock on the far wall read 2:12. The bathroom doors in the back were both ajar, a strip of bright white tile visible beyond. Fluorescent lights hummed. Everything about the space said open, come in, rest. Except the doors remained closed, heavy and indifferent. The driver tried the seam between them with their fingertips. The glass was cold and slick. There was no give, no manual override handle, just the faint rasp of skin on condensation. They leaned in a little, peering. Movement flickered in the reflection. For half a moment, it looked like someone was standing just behind them, a tall, narrow shape blurred by the glass and fog, its head tilted slightly, as if also trying to peer in. The driver straightened, heart giving one solid, irritable thump. When they turned, there was nothing there but their truck, quiet and familiar, sitting where they'd left it, its own windows dark. Behind the glass, the interior of the rest area waited, untouched. The CB, faint even from here, crackled from the cab, just enough to say, "Still there." A sound, softer than the hum of the lights, brushed against the driver's ears. A murmur, not quite words. It seemed to come from the building, from the space just beyond those unmoving doors. They found themselves stepping closer without meaning to, until their forehead almost touched the glass. The murmur didn't get louder. It stayed at the edge of comprehension, teasing shapes of syllables without resolving into anything. It could have been a TV turned down too low in another room. It could have been many people breathing slowly, together. The driver's fingers left clear streaks when they wiped at the condensation on the pane. The tracks glistened for a second, then began to blur as new moisture gathered. They backed away. Whatever this was, they had no intention of standing in front of a locked, humming building in a fog-filled lot listening to whispers that might have been the building's own appliances. They turned toward the bathroom entrance. Many rest areas with sliding glass fronts also had side access doors, regular metal ones that didn't rely on sensors. A short walk along the wet concrete walkway around the corner proved them right. A gray steel door under a smaller overhang, marked with the universal bathroom symbol and a small, peeling 24-hour access sticker. The handle was cold under their hand. It turned easily. Inside, the light was harsh and clean. The tile floor was dry, save for a few drops of condensed moisture that had fallen from a ventilation grate overhead. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and something chalky. It could have been any rest stop bathroom in the country. But something about the silence was too complete. Even in the middle of the night, buildings like this had their own noises. A distant hand dryer, the trickle of a toilet refilling, the quiet clink of a vending machine dropping a can. Here, there was only the drone of the ventilation fans, padded and distant, as if echoing from farther away than the walls should have allowed. The driver used the facilities, washed their hands in pleasantly warm water, watched the foam spiral down the drain. Normal motions. The solidity of porcelain and metal and water helped. The mirror above the sink showed their face under fluorescent light, a little more lined than a decade ago, eyes a bit tired, but firmly there. No shadowy figures loomed behind. The door remained closed. As they dried their hands, a thought rose unbidden. How long have you actually been here? They checked their watch. 2:16 a.m. They'd pulled off only a few minutes ago. It felt longer, but that was rest areas for you. The mind stretched the little stops, made them seem larger than life compared to the monotony of highway miles. The vents hummed. The building vibrated faintly with it. A low, constant vibration like a cat purring. They left the bathroom and stepped back out into the fog. It felt thicker. Not dramatically, just enough that the lamp's halos looked more smeared, their light less effective. The rest area's windows, when the driver glanced at them, were more thoroughly fogged over from the inside, as if warm moisture had been building behind the glass. Shapes moved in those pale rectangles, not distinct, just impressions, as if someone were walking back and forth along the interior corridor, pausing now and then to stand very still. The driver looked away, back toward their truck. For a second, their breath hitched. The rig seemed farther than it should have been. The lot, from this vantage, felt stretched. The distance between the building and their parking space had lengthened by several yards, enough that the proportions looked off. They frowned, blinked hard, and it all snapped back into place. The truck sat exactly where they'd left it. The lines on the pavement agreed. Fog, that was all, fog and tired eyes. They walked back, boots whispering on damp asphalt. With each step, the truck loomed closer, large and reassuring. The side of the trailer glowed faintly under the lamps, its logo a familiar splash of color in the otherwise monochrome world. The cab's outline was sharp. Behind them, the building's glass front gave off the faintest tap, like fingernails on a window. The driver didn't turn. They climbed into the cab and shut the door firmly. The thunk of it seating in the frame made the interior feel instantly safer. They tossed their jacket onto the passenger seat, sat for a second with their hands on their thighs, and just listened. The CB even turned low, still hissed, restful. The voice breathed eventually, barely audible. You sit, you listen, you forget to. Leave. Their hands slid to the CB's power switch. But they didn't flip it. Not yet. Doors were locked, they said, staring at the building. In the windshield's field, the rest area's front windows looked like blank, softly glowing rectangles. Side door was open, though. Bathroom's fine. Just a building. You came back. The words were almost approving. The driver started the engine. The familiar rumble shook the cab gently, a grounding vibration working its way up through the seat back and floor. Numbers danced on the dashboard. The headlights pushed 2 new tunnels into the fog, lighting up the exit lane that curled back toward the highway. They put the truck in gear. In the mirrors, as they eased out of the spot, they saw movement by the glass front. Condensation parted in vague, slow streaks, as if hands longer than normal, placed at odd angles, were sliding down from the top of the panes. The mist smeared after them, then closed again. Their chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with exertion. They pulled around the loop and headed back toward the ramp. The rest area's lamps thinned behind them, their orange halos swallowed bit by the white. In between the lamps and the fog, for a heartbeat, a shape stood on the sidewalk, tall, upright, with edges that wavered like heat mirage. Its head turned slowly to track the truck's path. Then it was gone, either lost in the mist or never there at all. The driver didn't look again. Back on the highway, the truck merged with the invisible traffic of nothing at all. The tires hummed on the worn center of the lane. The fog, if anything, felt lighter a few hundred yards past the rest area exit, as though it had piled itself closer to that building like a blanket wrapped around a sleeper. The CB crackled. You left. The voice sounded smaller now, a bit farther away. Had to, the driver replied, surprising themselves with how matter-of-fact their tone was. Got miles to make. Can't sit and listen all night. They sit, the voice murmured. They watch the fog. It pushes against the glass. They listen to the vending machines. The hum gets louder. Feels like it keeps time for you. You look up, and it's still the middle of the night. Always the middle of the night. The driver pressed their lips together, knuckles whitening briefly on the wheel. They thought of the clock on the rest area wall. 2:12. Had it moved at all while they were in there? How long you been out here? They asked quietly. This time, the silence before the answer stretched so long that they could hear their own heartbeat in their ears. Long enough. The phrase was empty and full at the same time. You stuck at that place? They asked, almost gently now. Or you stuck on 47? Static washed through the cab, thick for a moment, then thinning again. No response came immediately. The driver took a breath, then another, settling back into the rhythm of the road. Their eyes found the next mile marker as it emerged. 155. The numbers were a comfort, concrete, measurable. Finally, the voice returned, softer than the hum of the tires. I keep pace. With what? The driver asked. With you. It wasn't a threat. Not in its tone. It was stated the way one might say, I drive nights, or I like my coffee black. A simple, bald piece of information. Ahead, the fog began to break. At first, it only lifted a foot or two off the ground, becoming a low, rolling blanket that hovered just above the asphalt. The tops of fence posts emerged, then the faint, dark lines of hedgerows, then the distant skeletal shapes of power line towers. The sky transitioned from solid black to a deep, grainy navy. No stars yet, but less oppressive. The driver inhaled, feeling their lungs expand more fully. You don't have to sit there, they said into the cab. Don't have to sit at the rest area. Don't have to ride this road if you don't want to. The CB hummed softly. The heater fan ticked as it shifted speed subtly. Been here, the voice said. I listen. I talk. Sometimes they hear. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they stop. Sometimes they forget to start again. A memory surfaced, a post read on a forum last winter. Weirdest thing, y'all. Stopped at rest area 47. Sat down to rest my eyes for just 10 minutes. Next thing, I swear I look up and clock says 2:12, just like when I sat down. But my coffee's gone cold. My legs hurt like I've been sitting an hour. Got spooked. Took off. Won't stop there again. Underneath, Half a dozen replies. Yeah, that place is weird. Time warp, rest stop, haha. You just tired, brother. The driver's hands relaxed slightly on the wheel. Some of us leave, they said. You heard me leave. I heard you leave. The voice sounded almost thoughtful. You'll be back. They all come back sometime. Fog's thicker there. Easy to stop when you can't see far. Maybe, the driver said. Maybe not. The CB's light remained on, but the hiss had thinned to a barely audible thread. The voice, such as it was, seemed to be drifting farther away, like a station fading at the outer edge of its range. The fog peeled back further. Stars began to appear, a few at first, then whole clusters of them, their light crisp and cool. The fields alongside the road returned, dipping and rising gently, their furrows casting subtle shadows. A farmhouse light burned steady off to the right, its shape distinct now. 2 stories, a wraparound porch, a barn crouched nearby. The world felt large again, complete. The driver thumbed the CB's switch off. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of real things. The engine's hum, the slight whoosh of improved airflow now that they'd cracked the window again, the far-off call of some night bird disturbed by the passing of the truck. The road stretched out ahead, a straight black stripe under an opening sky. They drove. Mile 160. Mile 168. The glow of another town slowly bloomed on the horizon, a dull orange dome, promising gas pumps and coffee and noise. The rest area fell behind, swallowed into the fog belt that still hugged that particular patch of highway, as if the mist had chosen that spot and was not inclined to give it up easily. At the truck stop on the outskirts of town, under buzzing white lights, over the smell of fries and coffee thick enough to chew, a couple of drivers would be talking. One would mention the fog. Another would mention Rest Area 47. They'd trade half-remembered comments about time and drowsiness, about the way the building always seemed a bit too warm inside, a bit too quiet. Someone would mention, almost as a joke, the Rest Area ghost on the CB. You know, that one voice always telling folks the place is closed when it's not. Freaks out the newbies. Funny thing though, swear I heard that same voice 10 years ago, running this road the first time. They'd laugh, they'd shrug, they'd order more pie. Back on 47, in the soft, ever-present fog wrapped tight around Rest Area 47, the building's lights would stay on. The vending machines would hum their endless electrical lullaby. The clock on the wall would sit at 2:12 more often than it should. And on some nights, when the mist was deepest and the highway sky lost the stars again, a lone driver would be pushing through it, their headlights tunneling the white, their fingers just starting to feel clumsy on the wheel. They'd see the blue sign for the rest area. They'd think of a bathroom and a plastic chair in just 10 minutes with their eyes closed. Maybe they'd hear nothing on the CB. Maybe, under the soft hiss, a neutral voice would murmur, "Rest area's closed." If they listened hard, they might hear something else buried even deeper in the static. A slower, sadder echo of the same words, as if spoken by someone sitting very still behind glass, watching another pair of headlights decide whether to pull in or not. The choice, as always, would be theirs. But some miles down the line, on some fog-heavy night, if they felt a dull, inexplicable pull toward exit 47 again, they might remember the way the doors wouldn't open, the way the distance between truck and building seemed to stretch and contract like breath, the way time felt strange inside. They might decide to roll on, to let the fog keep its little pocket of stillness and voices and humming machines to itself. The plains would go back to pretending to be empty. The highway would lie quiet under a sky that, on clearer nights, let all the stars back through. And somewhere, wrapped in perpetual soft-lit twilight behind fogged glass, something would keep listening to the hiss of Channel 19, waiting for the next tired driver to say, "Anybody else out here on 47 tonight?" Story number 5. The coastal highway clung to the edge of the world, a thin strip of asphalt between dark water and darker cliffs. In daylight, it was a scenic route, postcard views of restless ocean, gulls wheeling above, sunlight flashing off whitecaps. At night, especially in late autumn, it became something else entirely. Fog had rolled in off the water hours ago, not in gentle, drifting wisps, but in deep, layered bands, each thicker than the last. It rose from the waves, climbed the cliffs in slow motion, and spilled over the road like a tide that had forgotten where to stop. What little moonlight there might have been was smothered. The sky was just more gray, indistinguishable from the fog except for the faint sense of height. The truck moved along the two-lane road at a cautious 40 miles an hour, its headlights flattening against the mist a few truck lengths ahead. Beyond that, there was nothing. No horizon line, no separation between sea and air. The world had reduced itself to a narrow ribbon of wet pavement and the muted glow of the center line blinking in and out at the mercy of the fog. Inside the cab, the driver kept both hands steady on the wheel, elbows slightly bent, shoulders relaxed by force of habit. The heater hummed, pushing a comfortable warmth into the cab, fighting the thin chill that seeped through the floor from the damp night outside. The dashboard cast a gentle blue-green glow over everything. Fuel gauge solid, oil pressure stable, temperature needle exactly where it should be. The radio had given up early on this stretch, music dissolving into static, then into nothing. The CB was on but silent, its orange numbers an unnecessary reassurance in an otherwise empty channel. There hadn't been another pair of headlights in the mirrors for nearly an hour. No taillights ahead. Just the truck and the road and the sound of the ocean, muffled but present, a deep, constant roar somewhere off to the left, like distant perpetual thunder. Fog banked against the driver's side windows, sliding in slow sheets along the glass. Every now and then a gust of wind pushed it sideways, thinning it just enough to reveal the vague, darker mass of the cliffs on the right, rising up steep and unforgiving. Guardrail posts flashed by in the beam's short, square markers, catching the light and returning it in dull, wet glints. Signs appeared without warning, their reflective faces looming out of nowhere and vanishing just as quickly. Slide area next 10 miles. Watch for falling rock. Turn out 1/2 mile. Turnouts along this stretch were frequent small gravel pads carved into the cliffside on the ocean side of the road, or narrow pockets scooped out of the rock on the cliffside. In daylight, they were photo spots. At night, they became small islands where a driver could pull off, let faster traffic pass, or catch their breath. Tonight, the driver hadn't seen a single one clearly. The fog turned each turnout into a vague suggestion of space at the edge of visibility, a wider blur in the gray. The first odd thing began with a sound. The ocean had been a constant presence, a low murmur beneath the truck's own noise. But as the miles went on, that murmur seemed to change. Not louder, not exactly closer, but more focused. The random crash and hiss of waves against rocks smoothed out into something longer, more drawn out, like the hush of a crowd holding its breath. The driver rolled the window down 2 inches to test it. Cold, damp air slid in, carrying the smell of salt and wet stone. The ocean's roar was clearer now, but it still sounded slightly wrong, too rhythmic, almost like breathing. Long inhale, long exhale. Not synced with the truck's motion, not tied to gusts of wind, its own pulse. They shut the window again. The fog swallowed the road sign that followed, leaving only a flash of white, the generic symbol for a scenic overlook. The driver knew this one. Just ahead there was a bigger turnout than most, with a low stone wall right at the cliff's edge and a view of the bay when the weather was clear. Good place to rest, to check straps, to stretch legs. Tonight, the idea of stepping out into the fog at the very lip of a cliff felt like walking into a blank page. The dash clock read 1:23 a.m. The route plan said they were ahead of schedule. Stopping for a few minutes wouldn't hurt. The truck's blinker clicked in the quiet as they eased toward the right. The fog thickened immediately, as if resenting the change in angle. The faint, pale smear of the turnout's entrance appeared a darker gray within the light, then resolved into the outline of a gravel lot, bordered by that low stone wall, maybe waist-high. The driver rolled in slowly, tires crackling lightly over grit. They pulled toward the back edge of the turnout, away from where anyone else might pass on the highway, and set the brake. The engine settled into idle, then cut off when they turned the key. Silence flowed in. Only it wasn't true silence. Now that the truck's motor was quiet, the ocean sound filled the cab completely. It pressed through the glass and metal, a soft but insistent presence. The long, shushing roar did sound like breath. It rose, held, fell. A faint undertone in it suggested something else, something like whispering, carried too far to distinguish words. The driver sat for a moment, listening. The interior of the cab felt too warm suddenly. They cracked the window again, letting in a sharp, salted chill that did more to wake them than any coffee. Headlights off, the fog outside looked almost luminous on its own. The turnout single lamp mounted near the entrance glared weakly, its light strangled before it could reach the cliff edge. The rest of the lot was shadow and pale haze. Beyond the low stone wall there was only gray. The driver grabbed their flashlight and stepped down. Dampness touched everything out here. The air beaded on their jacket, the gravel crunched wetly underfoot. The fog near the ground was thicker than above, swirling like a low, slow creak around their boots. The lamp's glow painted the stones of the wall in soft amber. They walked toward it, drawn not by curiosity about the view, which there couldn't be in this weather, but by a simple need to move after so many miles sitting. The sound of the ocean grew clearer with each step. The roar resolved into overlapping patterns, the crash against rock, the pullback across stone, the distant rush of a larger swell. But underneath that natural rhythm, the driver thought they heard something else. A softer murmur, layered within the white noise, rising and falling like voices in the next room. They reached the wall and rested their gloved hands lightly on its damp top. The stone was cold and reassuringly solid. For a long moment, they simply stood, peering into the blankness where the drop should be. Fog billowed and shifted. Sometimes it was so thick the air felt like wet cotton in their lungs. Sometimes, a thin vertical shaft would appear, a temporary tunnel down into a deeper gray where, for an instant, the suggestion of movement far below might be seen the white blur of a breaking wave, the dark flash of rock. Then the fog would close again, hiding everything. The driver closed their eyes briefly, listening harder. Yes, there. Voices, not distinct enough to be understood, but undeniably present in the way human sound layered differently than ocean. A cadence of consonants and vowels, muffled and looping. It was as if a conversation or many conversations were happening underwater. They opened their eyes. The turnout was empty. No other vehicles. The highway beyond the entrance was just a pale smear where the fog brightened a little, indicating open space. The lamp hummed faintly overhead. A shape appeared in the fog beyond the wall. At first, it was just a darker patch. Then it rose slowly, as if lifted by the rising of a swell beneath. It resolved into something roughly the height and width of a person, then a bit taller stretched. Its edges were soft, like unfinished charcoal sketch lines. It hovered a few yards out, not quite touching the wall. The driver's breath caught once in their throat, then steadied. The shape didn't move closer. It simply stayed, watching. If something without features could be said to watch. The whispers in the ocean's roar grew a fraction clearer. One phrase pushed up through the noise like a bubble breaking the surface. Pull over, just for a minute. The driver's arms prickled under their jacket. The voice wasn't quite external. It sat somewhere between the ear and the mind, the way a remembered sentence might. Yet it felt tethered to that fog shape out there, and to the road itself. They realized with a slow, almost embarrassed awareness that they had heard that exact phrasing on some long-ago night. Not here, not on this road, but somewhere inland, from a fellow driver over the CB. Gonna pull over just for a minute, stretch my legs, he'd said. Fog's thick tonight. Feels like I'm the only soul out here. He hadn't checked in again on Channel 19 after that. The driver's hand tightened on the flashlight. They didn't turn it on. Light felt unnecessary here, with the fog itself glowing. You're not seeing much, they said under their breath, not sure who they were talking to. The ocean, the shape, themselves, just fog and dark. The shape out over the drop swayed very slightly, as if rocked by some deep, slow current. It did not advance. It did not recede. It existed at the edge between where the turnout ended and the drop began, as if that boundary was its natural habitat. A thought surfaced, uninvited. How many drivers had pulled into this turnout on foggy nights, stepped up to this same wall, and leaned just a little too far, lulled by the blankness into forgetting the 1,000 feet of emptiness beneath? The whispers under the surf shifted. Another phrase surfaced, garbled but legible enough. "Come closer. You can hear better." The driver took a single, careful step back from the wall. They became acutely aware of the feel of the ground under their soles, now the grit, the slight slope away from the cliff. They imagined, with sudden vivid clarity, how easy it would be for that subtle angle to reverse, for the world to tilt, for balance to betray. Wind brushed the fog, stirring it gently. The shape shivered, stretched, then thinned, its outline unspooling like smoke. For a second, its height matched exactly the driver's own. Then it rose higher, shoulders aligning with the top of the low wall, as if standing on the invisible air just beyond. The driver understood, without knowing why, that if they stayed much longer, the urge to lean, to peer over, to just see if I can spot the waves, would grow quietly, patiently, like a seed watered by the ocean's whispered rhythm. They stepped back again. Behind them, the truck waited, a solid lump of shadow in the soft light. Its presence felt suddenly like a tether, like something that belonged entirely to the world of maps and schedules and logbooks. In the near distance, faint and hollow in the fog, a sound came, the low moan of another vehicle's horn. One long note, not urgent, more like a greeting. It faded quickly. No headlights followed. The driver exhaled through their nose. The sound came out visible, a small cloud joining the fog. "All right," they murmured. "Enough sightseeing." They turned their back fully on the wall. The motion felt like waking from a daydream in which they had stood there far longer than the clock would show. Their legs responded normally, carrying them back across the damp gravel. The lamp hummed. The ocean roared. The whispers in it dimmed with each step, subsiding into random noise again. By the time they reached the cab and climbed up, the shape at the cliff's edge had blurred so thoroughly into the fog that it might have been just another knot of dense mist. Or it might still have been there, watching the taillights when the truck pulled out. The engine started with its familiar rumble. The cab shuddered gently. Everything vibrated back into ordinary life. The driver pulled back onto the highway, the tires finding the slick, familiar texture of the painted lane lines. As the turnout slipped away into the rearview mirror's white, the CB crackled surprisingly to life. "See anything?" a voice asked, tinny but undeniably human. Another driver, somewhere ahead or behind, his signal thinned by fog and distance. "That overlooks a waist in this soup." The driver's hand went to the mic with relief. "Just gray," they said. "Ocean sounds like it's breathing heavy, though." The other driver chuckled. "That whole stretch does that in the fog, like it's trying to talk you into staying." The words sat a little too neatly on the moment. "Think I'll keep rolling?" the first driver replied. "Best way," came the answer. "You stop too long at those pullouts, start feeling like the road's gone away and you're just hanging over nothing." The CB went quiet again. The engine hummed. Fog drifted and thinned in patches. Every so often, through a tear in the mist, the driver glimpsed the faint white flash of a wave striking rock far below, proof that something solid and predictable still lay under all that restless water. They drove on. In the weeks to come, when talk turned to routes and weather over-counter coffee in coastal diners, someone would mention the overlook at mile 73 on the cliff road. "Strange place in the fog," they'd say. "Makes you feel like you're being watched." Seen folks swear they hear voices in the surf, telling them to lean over the wall. Most would laugh it off. Just nerves. Just the mind playing tricks when there's no horizon to pin it on. But more than one driver, hearing that, would remember a night when the ocean sounded like it was breathing, and the fog at the cliff's edge had taken on the vague outline of something tall and still, waiting patiently just beyond the low stone wall. They might not stop there again on foggy nights. They might let the ocean whisper to the empty turnout instead, its long inhale and long exhale washing against stone and mist, speaking softly to anyone who stayed just a little too long in the cozy, dangerous quiet between land and sea.